Hello everyone. This is Pooja extending a warm welcome to all of you. I am an instructional designer at Upside Learning and your host for the webinar today. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar, Leveraging Mobility Effectively. Before we get started, let me tell you a couple of housekeeping things. You will be receiving the recording of this webinar later through email. Feel free to ask any questions anytime using the chat facility. We have some polls for you in the course of the webinar, so do participate. And lastly, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask using the chat facility. Now, let me give you a quick introduction about Upside Learning. We are one of the world's leaders in training outsourcing. Our team has over 120 experienced e-learning professionals who have created over 8,000 hours of e-learning courses in over 5,000 projects so far. Our custom e-learning services include responsive e-learning design and development to rapid e-learning, on-site ID resources to multi-device testing, Flash to HTML conversion to translation and localization, and more to it. We have over 50 active clients around the globe, of which about 90% are happy about working with us and give us repeat business. Moving on to the webinar, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the speakers, Amit Garg, co-founder and director of Custom Learning Solutions. Amit keenly follows new technologies and trends that help create better learning experience. He consults for organizations to help them take wiser decisions in learning and development and leads the What's New team dedicated to R&D and innovation at Upside. Amit has featured as one of the top 10 movers and shakers in corporate e-learning 2013 through 2016. And our another speaker today is Mridula Ramesh, Manager Instructional Design. Mridula's passion for theory and translating theory into practice drives her work. Her experience ranges from conventional ILTs and e-learnings to creative learning games and story writing for e-learning. She also consults for performance-oriented solutions and is part of the What's New team for R&D and innovation at Upside Learning. Amit and Mridula, over to you.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar today. It is our pleasure to welcome you on this session. We do hope that we give you some valuable inputs today in the next 40-45 minutes. We are hoping to have some time for questions, even at the end, if we're not really caught in questions in between. Feel free to ask questions whenever you have. And if you're not able to hear us properly, just let us know through the chat window. We'll do something about it. All right, so we'll get started with the webinar. We have a few polls lined up for you. The first one being, what do you feel mobility is mainly about? And of course, we have kind of limited you by letting you select only one. So what is the main thing from your perspective? And why we're doing this is essentially to get a check on where our participants are on the journey towards mobility individually. So just see what the mix is like. We'll just launch that poll. If you could put in your responses. Just a couple of more seconds and then we'll close this. Let's close it and share the results. Okay, so we have about 75% of us saying it's the learners and 25% saying it's the devices. Excellent. Okay, let's close this and move on. We have another one. The second poll question is okay, so I had a slide between that, sorry. Okay, so mobility, of course, the most common way to think about it is that it is about device mobility. But I think even if you start with that assumption, most people realize it is not just the mobile that we are really focusing on. It is the learner whose mobility we need to be focusing on. And the more you think about it, there are a whole lot of new opportunities that open up based on that. So what kind of behavior they would have, in what context they would use the mobile, and how would they want to use it, etc. That would essentially come from not the device itself, but from the fact that the learner is mobile. Okay, so good choice. I think we have people who already experienced this in a way. Let's move on quickly. So these are some basic stuff. How do you use mobility? And of course, this is you can choose more than one response here. So converting some regular e-learning into mobile friendly formats, or thinking of doing some mobile friendly courses, use it as a part of a blend, or not at all. So just if you could put in your responses. Remember, you can choose more than one. Let's give it a few more seconds and then. Okay, if we can close the poll and share the results. Excellent. So as we can see, most of us are really looking to do some mobile friendly courses, which is great. Using it as part of a blend is, I think, the most practical way of using mobile in the learning mix. And converting to some mobile friendly formats, and the formats could be different from just being courses, is also an option. Good. Let's see what we have also experienced in our interactions with customers around this. So we typically find that mobile friendly but basic courses is where most organizations would want to begin, and it's the logical first step. You have some e-learning, you have been doing some other forms of training, and mobility can possibly support in certain specific situations. Let's convert some of those courses to mobile friendly formats. However, we found that when the volume of those existing legacy courses is large, or you want to do something beyond basic courses, the budgets could possibly become a little bit of a constraint. And that's where we suggest our clients to essentially be putting their money to effective use, which is identifying which courses or which learning that they already have can go to mobile formats, will make the most impact. Something that you have and you just want to convert and nobody's going to take it on mobile because of various reasons, there's no point investing money into it. Also, so that's one, which is selecting which ones to work on, and then selecting how to work on the ones that you have identified to work on, as in the process of going through which solution to pick for which particular learning requirement is the next step that we need to apply. And both of them really add up to give you the best bang for your buck. So we'll see some of that as we go along in our webinar today. Let's see what we have next then. Another thing that we find that as organizations start thinking about moving some of their learning to mobile devices, tools is one thing that they start looking for pretty early in the process, which I think it's a necessary step, but it is possibly not the first thing that you need to do, whether you need an Articulate or a Captivate or a Gomo or an Adapt or whatever. They are essentially necessary parts of the process, but probably come at a later stage. So initially we need to think of maybe a few more other things, which we'll cover today. But just on the tool side, if you reach, and when you reach that stage when you're looking for a tool to develop things or commit yourself to a particular tool organization-wide, which your team or your vendor should be using so that you're comfortable with that, we do have a little bit of a kind of a knowledge base available, which compares a lot of responsive authoring tools. It is available on our website, and we'll share the link in the chat window, or if it doesn't come to you, definitely after the webinar. But you may want to go through that and just see which tool might work well for you. But moving on, as I said, tools may not be the first thing you should think of. There's a whole range of technology solutions that you could be really thinking of. The first one, all of us, most of us commented, creating some sort of e-learning courses which can go onto smaller devices is the most obvious one. There are other things that you can do, like micro learning or short animations or videos, and this is beginning to be the most desired format for mobile learning, as we are seeing more and more. It fits well for different kinds of learning strategies. If you have space learning, you can use it. If you have performance support, you can use it. Even for product information, where somebody has to catch up on quick bite of information before a critical performance event. So in all of those situations, this seems to be working very well, and in our opinion is quite quickly becoming the default mode, or the most desired mode, as we look at for mobile learning. There are other options as well. You can of course go to apps and do things which are more advanced. Of course, that should be done when there is that specific need and you have that limited scenario in which you can focus on a certain set of devices, and hence apps will work well. You can build in augmented reality into that, geolocation services, learner input or learner generated content, etc. So for all of those kind of interactions, you possibly want to look at apps, and if you want to sprinkle some sort of augmented reality into that. There's of course another growing domain, which is virtual reality, which we do believe is going to become more and more important as we go along. Today, of course, mobile phones don't really give you that sort of environment or infrastructure to do a lot of virtual reality through mobile phones, except for some sort of 360 videos or point and reveal things through your VR headsets. But yes, going ahead, you will probably have more evolved VR sets which you will be using. But again, I think VR is still a little away from real use for a lot of corporate learning needs. AR might just be becoming more popular. Okay, we have another poll for you. We're kind of getting a lot of information from you, if you don't mind. So just to see, have you experienced what we are creating for our learners? So have you ever taken e-learning for your own training and development? I'm just sure that you have, but let's see if you haven't. Okay, so you can see now. Yeah, I don't think we need to wait for this one. We'll just quickly close this and move ahead. Good. So everybody has done that. That's a no-brainer. Let's go ahead to there's actually another one, which is yes. So this one is probably more relevant to our topic today, which is, have you ever accessed training on your mobile device? Okay, a couple of more seconds, and let's. Yeah, we can close the poll. There you go. So while all of us have access to e-learning for our own training and development in last few years, mobile may be still a little new to us as well. And if we are in the domain of designing solutions or being sponsors of solutions, I think this is one thing which we may want to do sometime, even if just for the sake of getting into that mode where you feel what sort of a mobile course would work well. So that brings us to this interesting point, which is about organizations starting off with mobile friendly courses, and when it reaches the learners, actually it is a 45-minute course, and that is an absolute no. On a mobile, that can't really give your learners a good experience, and hence it is critical that we look at proper processes so that we have learning strategies included there such that it delivers a good experience to our learners. So that's crucial, and this is just a very simplistic representation of what can go wrong. A 45-minute course is a strong no even for e-learning, leave alone for mobile. So there are, in fact, quite a few things that we think need to be thought of. So in a way, I've just tried to lay the ground for all of us today, and Mridula is going to jump slightly more deep into what other kind of things we need to think of and share some very interesting examples. So over to you, Mridula.
Thank you, Amit. So, when we think of the nature of content, this is one of the primary basic considerations to have in mind when we're considering making a mobile learning. Now, we're going to list out quite a few considerations like this one for you to look at before taking up the making of a mobile-friendly course or even redesigning an existing mobile-friendly course. The idea is that not all of these considerations just yield a simple yes or no decision. It's also sometimes about looking at considerations together and then seeing how they may even influence or guide the design of the training. So when we pick up the first one, the nature of the content, there are three aspects that we do want to look at. The simplicity of the content. Basically, if it's simpler content, then it's more compatible, easier to see it on a smaller screen. But when it's complex content, you really want to focus on it and you don't want to have too many interruptions. So naturally, a smartphone kind of an environment may not lend itself so well to being, focused time for the learner as much as, say, maybe a company-provided laptop or tablet. Then we also want to look at volume of content because, as Amit has explained already, you don't want to do a super lengthy course on a smaller screen. You want it to be a quick on-the-go kind of a piece of learning. And then when we consider cognitive load, this gets interesting. The question is really, what do we want people to do with the information that we are teaching? That's what we're getting at with cognitive load. So let's just look at an example to see how this would actually translate. So here's an example. This is just a screen grab from some content that we have worked with. And this is typically the layout of a runway. This course was for people who basically plan the flight routes. So in this content, you can see most of the information is coming from the diagram. So it's not voluminous, but it is fairly complex. The person who's taking the course has to actually study the runway lights, look at the layout and understand what kind of lighting will be there at what kind of distance on the runway. Now, when I look at this information, just to process it, I'm going to need to be able to peacefully concentrate on the information. And then look at this example where one of our clients was teaching their sales staff about the entire product range. But as you can see, there's quite a lot to know about each product and the selling gets fairly technical. In this case, the cognitive load is high, not just because there's a lot of volume of content, it's also because no salesperson is just going to kind of go through this, understand it, and regurgitate it to a client. Rather, this information would have to come up fluidly, naturally, and logically in the course of a conversation with a client. So when they have to take in this amount of information in the training, it becomes a little taxing to do so on a small screen where you can see, maybe 1 or 2 columns, and there's not enough space to do a comparative view, which is what you really need to do in this case. So on to the next consideration. When we look at the requirements of context, what do we mean? The simplest example to look at is of an application training. If the software is not mobile friendly, then it doesn't really make sense to have mobile friendly training, because logically, people are going to access the training in context of learning the software itself. So they need to be able to open the software and try out things as they go through the training. So if your software isn't mobile friendly, then you don't really need mobile friendly training material. Then the second aspect of context. What is the pace at which work is being done? How complex is the nature of the work that is being done? So let's look at, again, an example. This again happens to be for planning flight routes. And this is something called a Jeppesen chart. Basically, all we need to look at in this and understand is that when the learning audience is actually performing their job, they need to be able to look at both of these sets of information together. They need to take in this information together and then make decisions based on that. So clearly, you can't just drop off a chart saying, there's not enough place on a smart screen. So you do have to have the ability, the sheer screen real estate to show both the charts side by side. And your audience does have to actually take in this information side by side. As we know, some jobs are more complex than others. So this is also something that we would want to look at to see when we would go for a tablet only kind of a choice versus a tablet and mobile phone kind of a choice. So then we look at also the kind of outcomes in terms of learning that we are targeting with the training. What exactly do we mean by this? So simply put, the more complex the outcome, the more the need perhaps for a blended solution or multiple delivery modes than only a screen, especially only a mobile screen. So this, for example, you'll see a slightly blurred image at this point. That's just to protect confidentiality of the client. But this, for example, is the kind of toolkit that an actual employee uses on the job. You can see it's an enormous spreadsheet. And if you look at the menu here, we've just expanded that so you get an idea of how many tabs are contained within this one spreadsheet. And you're not even seeing the entire menu here. So the audience basically in real life, they get this entire set of sheets. They need to know what is in each and every tab. They need to make sense of this information, understand it, build a deeper understanding and kind of perform a synthesis of what is there in order to come up with a strategy. So as you can see, this is a really complex level of performance in terms of learning and actual job performance. So now if we were to look at how this would work with a single modality, it would not work as efficiently in terms of training impact. You do want the learner to actually be able to look at all of this information. When it comes to making a strategy, you do want a more open, free-flowing kind of evaluation of the learner's ideas. You do want to provide flexible and customized scaffolding. So you would want to consider at what points mobile training would be most efficient in a program like this. For example, it could be to cue certain behaviors, certain calendars when events have to take place. It could be to give a short reminder, remember the key principles of strategizing, that kind of thing. So what are the other considerations? The next one that we want to look at is the kind of intervention that we're targeting. So this is where, I just mentioned blended learning, but this is really where that comes from. We want to look at how complex the actual job performance is. We want to look at how complex a set of knowledge, skills, and attitudes the employee actually has to have on the job. We want to look at what kind of change we want to effect with the training. We want to look at what level of impact we want to make. And we want to look at what environment the training is being taken up in. We want to look at what are the noise the training must compete with to be heard by the learner. So, for example, we've already seen some examples of performance complexity and knowledge, skills, attitude complexity, but let's also look at the degree of change. If you were introducing, say, an organization-wide change and you needed people to change their behavior, right? That is going to have a huge level of impact. And that is typically the kind of training intervention where a one-off training would not be sufficient. Rather, you may want to have a recurring spaced learning program where at several points and at multiple points, you remind the learner about the desired set of behaviors that they must adopt. You also, in parallel, teach learners about the benefits of this change. You may also have a track of learning where you help them build the new skills that are necessary to actually implement this change. So all of this would become a more rich curriculum, and the type of intervention that you're targeting would change accordingly. So then we come to the curricular structure. What kind of curriculum do you have to have in mind? When you're looking at curriculum, typically the tendency for all of us tends to be to think of a linear curriculum, a start point, and then you have an end point. But there are different curricular structures, and especially when you're thinking of teaching your employees higher order cognitive skills, when you're teaching something like better strategizing or critical thinking, decision making that is more complex, maybe you would like to consider a spiral curriculum. Because in a spiral curriculum, for example, you would be teaching the basic fundamental principles, and then you would be deepening the knowledge of these principles through repeated different kinds of application. And when you have a program like this is where you can use a mobile very powerfully to be able to deliver multiple bursts of learning over various periods of time and actually create the context for your material to be relevant to the learner's everyday work. Again, when you're looking at the curricular structure, depending on how wide, how deep, or how complex your curriculum is, you may want to again consider what kind of design you want to go with on a mobile phone, what kind of design you want to go with on a tablet, whether you want to go with a certain combination of mobiles and tablets. All of that could change. Similarly, you also want to look at how long would it take to actually go through this curriculum. Because as we know, on a mobile phone, nobody is going to settle down to go through a 5-hour training. And realistically, say if you're learning about an enterprise application, it could take that long to actually go through all of the modules, learn all of the key procedures that you need to know just for your role. So these are further considerations. And we started all of this saying training must be effective, right? Training is no good unless it actually yields impact on the business goals, on what the business wants to achieve. So then if training is meant to make people successful at their jobs, good at their jobs, we need to look at the nature of their jobs. We need to look at the pace of the job. We need to look at how difficult a job it is. And we need to look at what factors could make the job more difficult or more easy to perform. What do we mean by this? So you remember this example that we talked about earlier. In this case, the role that actually uses this information is a very liaisoning role. So they must talk to internal customers to be able to evolve such a strategy. In this case, it's not just about knowing all the information or being able to strategize that makes the person successful at their role. It's also about communication skills, soft skills, being able to resolve conflicts, intuitively understanding the direction that their internal customer wants to move towards. All of this also contributes to the difficulty, the challenges that the job actually has in real life. So we also have to look at what are the things that we can realistically address in training and what modality of training would work best for that. This is an example that we've picked out just to highlight the choice where, we said earlier that when you're looking at these considerations, they can also shape how the design will be. So in this case, this is about media choice. Typically, we all tend to feel that, if it's text, it's too much work. It's too much of a burden to actually read so much information. Just give learners an animation and they'll be the happiest. The next best thing is to give them something verbally, but just don't make people read. It's too tedious. But this is a classic example where actually the design choice is best to make this in a text format. So just to give you a little background, this is a decision aid that is shared with counselors so that they can help certain patients go through the decision-making process of whether to continue, adjust, or stop their antipsychotic medication. This is a job aid. Now, imagine in the course of an actual conversation with a patient, if the counselor had to stop and watch an entire animation or navigate an elaborate and intricate interactivity, it would completely interrupt the flow of the conversation. And it would actually disrupt the performance of the job rather than facilitate it. Whereas, being in the simple text format that it is, it actually helps the counselor just pick it up, share the information with the patient, walk through the information together, and actually it helps move that conversation forward. So this is an example of how, depending on the context of the job and how it must be performed, you may even get insights into what kind of media choices to make for your mobile design. So then we come to the last few set of considerations, but these are far from being the least important. We want to really look at culture. So when we say culture, we mean how familiar are our learners and our organization as such with the technology that we're proposing. Do people already have existing routines that they would have to break away from and do something differently to take up our training? Is the technology that we're using stable? Are there proper policies in place to encourage people to take up the training? So let's go through each one of these. When we look at familiarity with the technology, very simply, by this age, we know you don't really need to have click next to continue. Most people can figure that out. But when you have, say, a very sophisticated interactivity on a mobile phone, if it is not familiar to your learners, if they don't generally tend to look up things on their mobile phone, first of all, they may not even think of accessing the course on the mobile. They may not make use of the fact that you have provided mobile-friendly training material. So we do need to see how familiar are people with the technology. Do they know how to navigate? Do they know how to do the basic things that we assume they can? Do they have existing routines? So we had this interesting experience where a training department had come to us and requested that, they wanted to move forward into the future and they wanted all the training materials to be digital, including classroom training materials. So we went ahead and did that. And then we found that people were anyway hurriedly printing out all of the materials that were given to learners, all the participant guides. They were quickly printing out all of these things and then sitting for the class anyway. They're just used to paper and pen. So it's no use kind of forcing, single-handedly saying this will be a digital-only training. Rather, we need to look at how to help people adopt this new way of working. Stability of the technology. If you've ever had to use a buggy app, you know how painful it is to get your work done, especially as a learner who's trying to, be proactive and take up some learning. If the material doesn't work properly, it kind of discourages you not just from going back to that course, but in general going back to any course. So we do need to be careful about the quality of what we put out. Then when we look at policies, does the organization have dedicated time for people to take up training? This is not always the case that every company makes dedicated time, in which case there is a factor we would want to consider in the duration of the training. There is a factor we would want to consider in terms of how motivated may people be to come and do something extra to learn on their own time. When it comes to higher end learning and development activities like knowledge sharing, or when peers are sharing their success stories, is there some kind of a policy about rewarding such effort when somebody actually takes the time to create information that other people can use and become better at their jobs with, or if somebody captures institutional knowledge, is there some kind of a mechanism first to make this easier for the people who are being enthusiastic and participative? Is there some kind of recognition for people who are being enthusiastic about learning? Is there some kind of a policy to reward people at the time of performance reviews and considerations? So these are things that we do want to think about. And the last thing is almost comical, but it's so critical. Basically, if your LMS is not accessible on your mobile devices, and that's where you're hosting your mobile-friendly training, you're really not letting learners actually make use of that facility you're providing. So that's a basic check to look at as well. And so now Amit will just walk us through the effective ways to use mobility.
Okay, so what we've done is while we taken you through some of those considerations that you necessarily need to go through to arrive at a good solution, what we've also looked at is what are the most effective solutions that you can create to leverage mobility in an enterprise from the learning and performance support perspective. And we've listed all of those here, but what's even more interesting possibly for you is that we've put all of these into different kinds of case studies for each one of these, and they are packed into a ebook. Again, if you haven't really accessed that, we would share the link of that in the chat room now. But so we have several case studies in that covering almost all of these types of solutions that can be created for mobility. Let's quickly look at just these, just run through them and see where they fit in. So space learning, I think this is a good one in terms of if you are trying to extend the duration of the program, even if it is let's say a classroom program, and you want to support it with some sort of reminders and follow-ups and scenarios and assessments, etc. Just 5 minutes a day, maybe once a week or for 5-10 weeks can just increase the value of the program. There are some which can help imbibe good behaviors if you are able to craft that properly and send those out through a mobile device on a regular basis. Knowledge sharing, I think that's a huge one, though I think you need to have a platform kind of arrangement and look at culture, both. Both of them become crucial. I think knowledge is essentially something which would be possibly in your staff's heads, and unless they're willing to share it, it won't really become useful. So I think that becomes the most important part. Expertise capture, you can have a formal way of doing this, interviews, etc., questionnaires. There's a very interesting program that we're working on right now, which is how to capture expertise of the, let's say, 10% of the most successful salespeople in a company and spread it out to the rest of the sales staff. So I think it can become hugely useful if you are able to do that, and I think mobile devices are just suitable for that. Onboarding, it is something that organizations have been looking at, and there are several different cases in which it works well for mobile devices. You may want to do even pre-onboarding thing, people who have not yet joined and they have just been offered and they are going to join in the next week or two, etc. And you want to send them out some information even before that. Or, for some organizations, there are members who are in your extended channel and they are not really on your roles, and they can be then probably trained through these sort of initiatives. Okay, I'll just take a look at the chat window. Okay, Ricardo, I believe you can't download the material. We'll just look into that, and I think we have your email ID. If you're not able to, we'll send it across to you. All right. So the next one is field force training. Again, these are people who are really, out and about most of the times, either at customer locations or other places, and difficult to catch for training. And mobile really becomes a huge uh, infrastructural positive aspect where we can deliver that kind of training. 70-20-10 is something that we have quite literally been paying lip service to for a long time. It is something that's been around, but frankly, we've not had the tools to do it properly. So you can do some, you can't do 70-20-10, by the way. You can do something around it. You can possibly, have a structure in which you can let it happen. You can facilitate, you can monitor, you can, support it in some way. But again, because that 70 part or whatever number you want to ascribe to that is going to happen in the flow, it has to happen on a device which is available with people all the time. Again, building learning culture, something that I covered earlier under space learning, etc. Change management is a important area which can be targeted through mobile rollouts, etc. War for talent is an important one, we believe, because I think as the intensity of this grows and you are fighting for the best resources and the competition is continuously growing, most organizations would want to keep those resources as sharp as possible so that they continue to feel that they are being added value to on a more regular basis, and the company is interested in doing that. So while they are self-motivated and they can do it to some extent by themselves. Live performance support is a area which can be extended, and I think in some organizations is being used very effectively, but may not really apply to all. But yeah, again, an important area which can be leveraged through mobile. Customer education, I personally see this happening in a lot of digital goods that is already happening, where companies are really going through either reviewer channels or their own websites and trying to educate people about their products and services. So when you walk into a showroom or a store, you really don't rely on the salesperson's knowledge. You are already knowledgeable enough to see which product you want to buy. You are essentially just finalizing the purchase most of the times. So customer education is only going to become even stronger from here as more and more information and more precise targeting of information, either in location. So you enter a store and you get information which is more relevant to the section of the store that you are in, etc. That can help you really quickly get the information that you need, which may not be really available with the salesperson that you encounter at that point of time. And it happens, I'm sure it will happen to all of us. Organizational agility, I think that should probably cover, a lot of these points. It would probably spread over a lot of them. In-house training production, I think this is an area where, it can help through mobile devices, especially as we see videos coming into the learning mix. The quality of devices are improving. Capturing videos is becoming much easier, and quick and dirty videos for performance support, for solutions to problems that are being raised, etc., are being done. So, and this would overlap with user generated content as well. On-demand training, again, usually to be accessed in the moment when you need it, and hence on the device that you would really be carrying with you. Remote and offline learner management, I think this is something which would be useful either when you have extended enterprise or field force that is really accessing training for you. And live coaching is maybe an extension of the live performance support, which you can possibly utilize when you have more focused pairing that can be done between a coach or maybe a mentor and mentee. So all of these, as I said, we have covered in our ebook. You may want to download that and take a look. And but for our session today, what we have done is we have also highlighted one of these, which is onboarding, and Mridula will take you through that in more detail, how we've gone about creating that solution. Mrudula?
Thank you. So earlier we had talked about there being the possibility of a range of technology options, right? Where you can look at a typical e-learning course to anything up to, say, even virtual reality. Now, when would each thing be useful and how would it look for this need, induction? We've taken induction thinking that's probably something that everybody can relate to. So when we look at a typical e-learning course for induction, we would probably be looking at covering things like what is this company about, what is the history of the company, what are the key policies that the new person should know about. But say we are training maybe a field force of salespeople or maybe people who do home visits like repair and service personnel. So in that case, maybe we would want to not go with a whole full-fledged e-learning, but rather shorter bursts. So then we may look at micro-learning and short animations. Maybe you'd have a small animation to talk about, what is the company's history. Maybe you'll have a micro-learning to just explain the culture of the company through a few stories. Or perhaps you're looking at making the whole induction experience more sophisticated. How about considering an app where you're using augmented reality and you're making induction not just a training, but a whole experience by itself? So you could actually orchestrate the experience of the facilities that the company offers and the experience of just working at that company through an app and through augmented reality. Now, when would you look at augmented reality versus virtual reality? Say your environment has a few complicating factors. It may be a tough environment to train in. So something perhaps like an operating theater or maybe like a trading floor where there is so much happening and there's such an intense pace. And, people, maybe there's a lot of literal noise, maybe there's a lot of cognitive noise. So you may want to choose between augmented and virtual depending on these factors. But what we'd like to do now is just show you an example of a design that we have ideated for induction as an experience where we have focused on augmented reality. So this is what I'd like to show you now. Let me give you a little background. This particular design was for one of our clients in the service sector. And this company typically focuses on service excellence by looking at customer touch points. This is a very common and popular and strategically useful way to look at customer service in the service sector. And we know this company, we've known them for a while, built a long-term relationship with them. We know that they tend to typically think in a very long-range, strategic and creative manner. So the solution that we came up with for them has three components. The first component is that basically the learner will know what it's like to be a customer of this company. They will experience all the services that the company offers as a customer. The second part of the solution is that the learner will experience some guided live games, and they will actually role play these games with their colleagues, with their new colleagues. So it's a way of not just making the learning environment very realistic. It's also a way to actually integrate them more comfortably into the team. It's a way of getting the whole team to interact with the newcomer. It's a way of creating that culture of learning and helping each other. The third component in the solution that we offered is an app-based experience orchestration. Now, I know that sounds a little mysterious, so let me just show you a few concept representations. Okay. So one of the things I had told you is that this company anyway looks at customer touch points. So one thing that we did do was do our research to propose to this company what employee touch points could look like. And these touch points would be useful in the long-term learning and development plans of the company, because across these touch points, you can find out what is the employee's experience like at the company, at what point do they feel they need more support or training or help. And this touch point concept also became the basis for the experience that we were orchestrating through the app. So in the app that I mentioned, there were going to be three roles really, where one is for the manager, one is for the new joinee, and one is for the buddy. So let me just give you a few seconds to run through what kind of features would be there in the app for each role, and then I'll show you some conceptual markups. Okay. So in the manager's login, the manager would typically be able to take feedback from the newcomers, would be able to see the status or the progress of each newcomer in the induction process. They would be able to see how the buddies are doing, if they need any help, if they want to share any feedback. And in one app, in one view, the manager gets to know exactly what is the state of the new joinees who have come in. How are they faring? The new joinee, on the other hand, would have a different kind of a login where we told you it's going to be induction as an experience. So even on the first day, even before reporting to work, there'd be a little notification from the app saying, hi, you're due to join today, and here's the route to get from your home to the office. This is where you need to report. And this is so helpful. It's such a small thing, but it's so helpful. Typically, if it's a large company, there's a factory somewhere, there's a head office somewhere, a sales office somewhere else. If you just do a Google Map search, you're not going to know which place exactly to land up at. So the app will help even with that. And of course, the app will also provide easy access to policies, rules, emergency helplines, and contact numbers. And then here's what the buddies login is going to look like. So they would get a little blurb saying, okay, this is the person that you're going to be the buddy to. This is their background, so that you have the information you need to provide a more personalized experience of the orientation and of the buddying to the new joinee. So how did we come up with something that's different like that? Well, it's through the process that we like to follow at Upside. You may not recognize this immediately, since it's not exactly ADDIE, it's not exactly anything else. This is our own process. So the first step is a meet and greet, where we understand our clients' organizations, their preferred ways of working, the situation that they're looking at improving, the performance that they're looking at improving. After we do that, we look at how to best frame the problem. So it's not enough to just say, they want an induction training. Rather, if the company would like to make the person's first day at the office memorable, and they would like that day to help start the learning of the employee, and to eventually, say, by the end of a week, make the employee job ready. That's a wider problem definition, and that actually leads to more creative solutions like the one we showed you. So once we've identified what the problem is and how we will go about addressing it, we also do our research, and we come up with the analysis and the solution that we would recommend for this problem. So then we make a quick prototype so that the organization can test out this prototype with all the key stakeholders that they would like to involve. And if the stakeholders have any feedback, we quickly iterate, and we go into whole-scale solution development. So this is where also, if necessary, we will ramp up the production team. And at the end of that, we design, deliver the product. And we also have our closure and follow-ups. So any learnings that we have collected, typically we tend to have long-standing relationships with clients. So whatever we've learned over that period of time, we build our internal knowledge base so that we can come back with more tailored, more strategic solutions for our clients. So at this point, we'd like to invite any questions or any thoughts that you may have. I'd also like to add, apart from questions, if there's any feedback that you'd like to share with us, please go ahead and feel free to do so in the chat window again. So at this point, we'd like to thank you all for your time, and we hope you found this a useful 1 hour. It was a pleasure having you here. Have a very pleasant day. Thank you, and bye-bye from Upside Learning.